Back, we're talking about U.S. national security and the increased government surveillance in the wake of rising global terrorism. Joining us here in Washington is Fred Fleitz. He's held national security positions at the CIA, U.S. State Department, Defense Intelligence Agency, and Congress. And Shahid Buttar is a constitutional lawyer and civil liberties advocate. And also joining us is Julian Sanchez. He focuses on national security and intelligence surveillance at the Cato Institute, a think tank here in Washington. Julian, I want to go to you because you didn't get as many words in before the break as our guest. Let's widen this out a little bit. Internationally, obviously, this bulk collection of data has had an impact as well. Edward Snowden's revelations too. It was revealed Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor's phone, may have been listened to, also Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. And there have been charges of hypocrisy of the US when they point the finger at countries like China that they're doing something very similar. What's been the international impact?
I mean, so I'll say, just to start, that there is some fairness that I think that many countries that are complaining about what NSA is doing are themselves either clients of NSA or themselves equally eager to hoover up data. But I think it's obviously had a harmful effect, in particular on U.S. companies. I think there's a way in which these disclosures, as a result of our intelligence community's overreach, may have harmed not just sort of American technology businesses, but also its own ability to collect. We've seen companies like Cisco, after the disclosure that their sort of business routers were being compromised with malware, complaining of drop-offs in orders. We've seen companies like Google and Yahoo and cloud providers complaining of lost revenue as people around the world, especially businesses around the world that have sensitive commercial data they need to store somewhere, not trusting American companies with that data. So that's an economic harm. It's also a harm in the sense that we benefit greatly from the fact that so much global internet traffic flows through the United States, where it's within easy reach of NSA, but that is not a law of nature. That is a contingent fact that has to do with economic and technological factors that can change if the rest of the world decides they no longer trust their data flowing through the United States.
Fred, I want you to pick up on that because revelations about backdoor access to foreign networks. We've seen China, for example, want to move to domestic technology. Also, the commercial impact of the future of the internet and the routing around the world. All this has an effect over what we've heard. Can the NSA continue to do what they're doing, considering all the concerns internationally?
I think so. The NSA is very talented, and I'm happy that there were recommendations made by the President's review panel stemming from the Snowden leaks, many of which he ignored concerning backdoors and other things like that, because he recognizes that we have to have robust efforts in this day and age to fight terrorism and opponents to the United States who would harm us. On a broader range concerning Angela Merkel, I think it's interesting about the to-do that was made about that, because a few months later it turned out that the Germans were listening into the telephone calls of Secretary Kerry and Secretary Clinton. All states today spy on each other.
It's a big boys' world.
Snowden was just revealing something that everybody knows is going on.
Shahid, do you agree with that?
Well, two pieces. First, with respect to backdoors and encryption, I think people forget that when NSA and government agencies preserve vulnerabilities in whether it's malware, whether it's hardware spiking, whether it's intercepting the Cisco routers on their way to their ultimate destinations, or preserving zero-day vulnerabilities in software, all of these tacit tools that the government agencies claim give them power, essentially, to effectuate greater surveillance, also undermine internet security for everyone. Because it's not just the government agencies that can use those holes, right? They're available to every narco-trafficking syndicate, every foreign government, right? The NSA is basically doing the work of the Iranian intelligence agencies for them, right? There's a global security paradigm being eroded in common by all the agencies, and I think that's something to note here when we look internationally. This is a people's struggle around the world to preserve information, access, and freedom, and this is the key part. Not just privacy, but the ability to feel free to embrace an unpopular opinion. That's what's at risk around the world, and it's all of the intelligence agencies together that threaten it.
Julian Sanchez, do you think that that's actually a case as the Americans stand for freedom around the world, yet this stands in stark contrast?
Well, I mean, I will say, I think it's true to say that it's nothing new that governments try and spy on each other. What is, I think, novel, certainly for a country purporting to be a liberal democracy, is the large-scale surveillance on people who are not parts of foreign governments, the hoovering up of internet traffic in general for mass analysis, the attempts to exploit networks for future purposes. So, attacking system administrators just because you might one day want to have visibility on their network. It's the scale, again, not just of the U.S., but the U.S. in tandem with the rest of the Five Eyes, the U.K. and other Anglophone countries, that is, I think, something new on the face of the globe.
I'm glad you mentioned the Five Eyes. The countries, mainly Western, New Zealand and Australia, of course, are part of that all collaborate over intelligence gathering. It's interesting because as the US is going through this period of introspection about NSA bulk collection of data, many of these countries in the Five Eyes are thinking of actually implementing metadata gathering themselves. Obviously, we've had the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, the 7/7 attacks in London. There is this feeling that European countries want to do more. Why are we seeing that discrepancy, Fred?
Well, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are very tech-savvy. We know they're using every possible method to communicate with each other, to inspire their followers over the internet. And I think it's interesting that as we've had this debate in the United States, the French are moving exactly where the United States is for the metadata program. I wanted to answer something concerning internet security and encryption. There is a movement by privacy advocates that we should somehow make the internet a spy-free zone and not let the NSA to exploit internet vulnerabilities and software vulnerabilities. And I think that's a very noble thing to ask for. The problem is, once the US adopts such a standard, our adversaries won't. It's a nice thing to ask for in theory, but I don't think it's something that is ever going to be adopted globally.
Shahida, I just want to bring up a point, because Fred's written about the fact that ISIS does a lot of inspiration and for attacks here in the United States. The Garland attack, for example, in Texas, you wrote about, and Fred, and you said that we need this monitoring because we could see where the inspiration is coming from and use that even if they're talking to people here in the United States. Is that not a valid point?
I don't think entirely. I mean, the valid point to me, what I draw the inference is that mass surveillance was operating well before the Garland attacks, and they still happen. It operated well before the Boston Marathon attacks. They happened. They were operating before the Fort Hood shooting. They happened before the recent terror attack in North Carolina that killed a bunch of Muslim homeless feeding activists. That happened. It doesn't actually work, and as multiple courts, most recently the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, have affirmed, it's not legal and it's unconstitutional. So the whole idea that we're debating the merits...
Well, they didn't rule it was unconstitutional, but Julian, can you pick up on that point?
Other courts have.
Well, in terms of effectiveness, I think, Fred implies that it's just a handful of wacky liberals who question the effectiveness of this bulk collection as an intelligence tool. I think it's almost the opposite. The claim that this kind of bulk collection is an effective tool is now an outlier, I think, even within the intelligence community. If you look at Chris Inglis, the former deputy director of NSA, in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, acknowledged essentially that when you looked at it, it wasn't dozens of attacks that this program had prevented, but maybe there was one case of someone funding al-Shabaab in Somalia where they might have found someone a little bit faster. It's a shame to see other countries, I think, adopting this when it seems like the growing consensus here is that this is not very effective. And intuitively, this should make sense. Yeah, it may be that whoever tried to shoot people drawing Muhammad in Garland was visiting some ISIS website first, but probably a ton of people were visiting some ISIS website first and trying to check out everyone who clicks on a web link or watches a radical cleric on YouTube is going to give you a lot of false positives. And that's, in fact, the complaint we've heard repeatedly again and again from within the intelligence community, that gathering up all these, this hay gives you a lot of false positives for needles. They end up following false leads and checking out pizza guys instead of using time-tested, targeted methods to find the people who are genuinely worrisome and dangerous.
Fred, is there an over-reliance on technology now and not investing all this money in the field, intelligence gathering the old-fashioned way?
Well, I would dispute what I just heard, having been an intelligence officer. I know intelligence programs aren't perfect. They're not going to find every terrorist plot, but they have stopped the 215 program and similar programs have stopped
Apart from the ones we've read, I mean,
some important terrorist attacks. We have to have more human collection. I agree with that. Human collection is expensive and dangerous. Sometimes these technological methods are the only way we can get at these terrorist groups, but I think we should look at other methods too.
what other methods?
Well, I mean, having human collection, human sources on the ground. It's hard to penetrate an ISIS cell. And sometimes the only thing we have
Do you think
is
that's
electronic
why, in a way,
collection.
there's been this reliance on technology, because the war on terror hasn't delivered, and so...
I think technology has changed so substantially, it's opened up a whole new world of intelligence collection that many nations are making great use of.
Julian, you said...
You know, let me just say, I'm trying to assign some homework for the viewers here because, you know, I say this wasn't effective, he says it was effective. You know, who looks credible? It's a bad way to decide who's right. I want to urge people, go on the internet and look up the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board report. There is an exhaustive analysis based on a review of classified documents of the claims that were made about the effectiveness of this program. And as with a lot of other large-scale spy programs, what we see is that once you apply a little bit of critical scrutiny, the claims don't hold up. So don't take my word for it. Go look and see if their account is convincing to you.
Let me add to that. That panel split 3-2. The 3 Democrats against the program, the 2 Republicans were for the program.
You can't claim this as a partisan issue. The Republicans are the most vociferous opponents of these programs.
We're concerning this panel, that's a misleading example.
But in terms of the analysis of its effectiveness,
to shoot the program down.
Just to be clear, the critics of these programs are hardly exclusively left-wing. Mainstream Republicans are out in force against these programs.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Gentlemen, thank you so much. That's where we'll have to leave it. We've got a homework assignment from Julian Sanchez as well.